Preflop ranges, calling is a leak. In online poker games, especially when you are multi-tabling and trying to keep your decisions clean, your preflop range is not just which hands you play, it is how you play them. The biggest mistake I see from newer players is simple. They call too much. You are not calling because it is best. You are calling because it feels safe. But poker does not reward safe, it rewards expected value. Preflop calling is often where expected value quietly leaks out of your win rate, one small pot at a time. Why calling feels good and loses money. Calling keeps the pot small, avoids getting 3-bet, and lets you see a flop. That sounds nice. The problem is that you pay for those comforts with 3 real costs, and none of them show up as a big dramatic mistake. First, you surrender initiative. The raiser controls a lot of the hand because they can c-bet many boards profitably. Second, you realize equity poorly. When you call, you do not automatically get to see 5 cards. You face barrels, you fold too much, and you end up turning hands with equity into 0. Third, you invite raked to punish you. In many online pools, small and medium pots get raked aggressively. Calling to create more of those pots is a quiet tax on your strategy. Context dictates strategy, but defaulting to calls is not solid. It is passive, and passive preflop poker creates tough post-flop guesses where your opponent has a range, position, and initiative edge. Preflop ranges are a plan, not a list. Most players treat ranges like a chart. They ask, can I play King-Jack suited here? The better question is, what is my best action with King-Jack suited here, given who is left to act? Your range should be built around clear actions. Raise first in, 3-bet, or fold. Calling exists, but it should be the smallest branch because it produces the most uncertainty. First, raising wins immediately sometimes, builds a pot when you have advantage, and gives you initiative. Second, 3-betting denies equity, isolates weaker ranges, and stops opponents from realizing equity cheaply. Third, folding is a skill. It protects your bankroll and your mental game from marginal spots. Calling is not evil, it is just overused. When you call, you must justify why you are not raising and why you are not folding. If you cannot answer that quickly, it is probably a leak. The 3 main reasons calls bleed expected value. Let us be specific about what goes wrong, not hypothetically, but in the way online hands actually play. 1. You get squeezed. When you call, you leave the door open for aggressive players behind you to 3-bet. Then you fold and donate dead money. This is why who is left to act is critical. Calling is safest when the players behind are tight, passive, and unlikely to punish you. 2. You cap your range. Many players call with medium-strength hands and 3-bet with premiums. Good regulars notice. Your calling range becomes capped and face-up, and you get pressured on later streets. 3. You overvalue implied odds. Newer players convince themselves they are set mining or trying to flop big. That is hope poker. You miss most flops, then you fold, or you continue incorrectly. Relative strength is everything, and most flops do not cooperate. When calling actually makes sense. You still need a calling range sometimes, especially on the button, versus a solid open where 3-betting, everything would be too aggressive and too easy to counter. But your calls should have a purpose. First, hands that play well in position, like suited broadways and suited connectors that can realize equity and navigate turns. Second, hands that do not want to get 4-bet, meaning you do not gain much by 3-betting them versus a tight opener. Third, line protection, meaning you need some strong hands in your call range so you are not capped. Notice what is missing. Because the hand looks pretty is not a reason. Because I might flop a set is not a strategy. You call when you can reliably realize your equity and avoid getting exploited by squeezes and pressure. Beginner range fix. Replace calls with 3-bets. If you are new, your easiest win rate upgrade is to cut your calling range down and move some of those hands into a 3-bet or fold framework. This does 2 things. First, you win more pots pre-flop, which is huge online where edges post-flop are smaller and rake exists. Second, you create simpler post-flop trees because you have initiative and more range advantage on many boards. For example, hands like Ace-Jack suited, King-Queen suited, and some suited wheel aces often perform better as 3-bets than calls in many pools. Not because 3-betting is always correct, but because it produces cleaner expected value and reduces mistakes. Keep it simple. In position versus big blind. Since this is a fundamental preflop concept, we keep the structure standard. You are in position, you open, and the big blind defends. This is where new players leak by auto-calling later in the hand, but the preflop foundation matters. When you open from the button, your range is wide and the big blind defends wide. That is normal. The mistake happens when you build a habit of calling preflop in other positions, creating multi-way pots, and then trying to outplay people post-flop with capped ranges. Start with a disciplined mindset. Your default is to raise first in. Your response to an open is usually 3-bet or fold, with a small calling range when you have position and a good reason. Hand scenario: the comfortable call trap. Game: 100 NL online, 100 big blinds effective. Hero is on the button. Hero hand: King of spades, Jack of clubs. Preflop: Hero opens to 2.5 big blinds. Big blind calls. Flop: Ace of hearts, 8 of spades, 3 of clubs. Action: Big blind checks. Hero checks back. Turn: Queen of diamonds. Big blind, that's 5. Big blinds into 5.5 big blinds. Hero calls. River: 2 of hearts. Big blind bets tanit. Big blinds into 15.5 big blinds and hero folds. This is what passive lines create. You check back a flop where you could have C bet small with range advantage. Then you called the turn because you picked up equity, but you still had a hand that hates big river pressure. You paid 2 bets and folded, which is the classic call to see one more leak. Now compare that to an aggressive pre-flop mindset in other spots. If this were a cutoff open and you were on the button with king-jack offsuit, you will often do better with a 3-bet or fold approach than a flat call that invites squeezes and forces you into bluff catching later. Anti-hope. Poker: stop paying to miss. Newer players love the idea of calling with small pairs, suited aces, and suited connectors because they imagine the perfect flop. But you do not get the perfect flop often, and even when you do not always get paid. So here's the discipline. If you are calling, you need a plan for common board textures, and you need to know what you do versus a C-bet, versus a turn barrel, and versus a river shove. If you do not have that plan, you are not strategizing, you are gambling. Preflop ranges are your first line of defense against yourself. Tighten your calls. Pick more 3-bets. Fold more marginal hands. Your post-flop life becomes easier and your expected value goes up. Key takeaway: calling pre-flop is often a leak because you give up initiative, realize equity poorly, and create raked pots where you fold later under pressure. Build ranges around clear actions. Default to raise first in and versus opens lean toward 3-bet or fold, with a small, purposeful calling range only when you have position, low squeeze risk, and a strong plan for post-flop. Now, let us test your edge. Question 1. What is the biggest pre-flop mistake the article says newer players make? Answer: they call too much pre-flop. Explanation: the article explains that many players default to calling because it feels safe, but it quietly leaks expected value and creates tougher post-flop decisions. Question 2. Name the 3 costs of preflop calling listed in the article. Answer: you surrender initiative, realize equity poorly, and invite rake to punish you. Explanation: the article argues these costs are not dramatic in one hand, but they add up by giving the raiser control, forcing folds versus pressure, and creating more raked small and medium pots. Question 3. What are the 3 main reasons the article says calls bleed expected value in real online hands? Answer: you get squeezed, you cap your range, and you overvalue implied odds. Explanation: calling can invite players behind to 3-bet, make your range face up if you only 3-bet premiums, and lead to hope poker where you pay to miss most flops. Question 4. According to the article, when does calling actually make sense pre-flop? Answer: when you have position and a purpose, good equity realization, low benefit to 3-betting versus a tight opener, avoiding 4-bets, and line protection so your call range is not capped. Explanation. The article emphasizes that calls should be the smallest branch and must be justified by position, squeeze risk, and a clear post-flop plan. Question 5. In the comfortable call trap scenario, what leak does the article highlight about Hero's turn and river decisions? Answer. Hero paid 2 bets and folded to pressure, calling the turn to see one more and then folding on the river. Explanation. The article uses the hand to show how passive lines lead to uncomfortable bluff-catching spots and repeated calls that do not reach showdown. Study hard, play smart. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next lesson.